Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to help you understand context in the war in Ukraine. Now, some of you have asked me, well, what kind of professor are you? And some thought of history or whatever. It's not. I did teach history for a little while at the secondary level, but I'm a management professor. My PhD is in organizational leadership. I have an MBA. I also have a second master's in public policy. And so I focus on primarily leadership kind of issues. So I have a different perspective than maybe the guys that do the maps and the military models and that kind of thing. I'm not a military guy. But I saw this article, and sometimes when I'm reading articles, preparing, just trying to catch up and understand what's going on, an article leaps out and I go, wow, there's a video there. This is one of those times. We're going to talk about Putin's economic war and how he's weaponized trade. And this is actually as much of a reason for the invasion as some of the other political reasons. Okay, so let's get into it. Putin waged a trade war. This is in Al Jazeera, which happens to be a pretty good source covering the war between Ukraine and Russia. On some other things, I would go, maybe not, but the reporting has been very good about this particular topic. Putin waged a trade war long before bombing Ukraine. Which side is winning? Okay. So last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that he was shutting down the Black Sea to Ukrainian agricultural exports. Now, we remember that when the war started, it got shut down. Turkey brokered a deal, and then we had the grain deal for a while, and then he shut it down after the attack on the Kerch. The reason, ostensibly, was Ukraine's second attempt to cripple the Kerch Bridge. But that wasn't it. This is fascinating. The SBU developed those Sea Baby drones, and then in retaliation, Russia said it was withdrawing from an agreement allowing the shipment of Ukrainian grain out of the Black Sea, brokered a year earlier by the United Nations and Turkey to prevent hunger among the world's poor. Okay, now, what's fascinating here is he doesn't mind weaponizing trade, even though he knows that it's going to hurt particularly those that he says he cares about in Africa, that like, we're your partners, right? Well, he wants to be their partners, but he doesn't want any competition in that. If you think of Putin as like in terms of the analogy of a mafia boss, this makes a lot more sense what I'm about to explain. Okay, so marking its withdrawal, Moscow launched an overnight missile attack on Ukraine, Odessa, Cherndomorsk, two of the three ports authorized to export grain under the initiative, destroying grain silos, fuel, oil, and loading equipment. So these were the places where it could go from. He tried to destroy the infrastructure that would allow the grain to go out. 2 days later, Putin revealed the real reason for his change in strategy. It wasn't because of the Kerch. The Kerch was just a pretext, as so often happens, that this is not why I did it. I did it for this reason, but I blame that reason. In a staged conversation with his agricultural minister, and whenever they have these events, it's always this like formal, staged, I'm going to say this, you're going to say that kind of dog and pony show. Dmitry Patrushev, Putin said Russian farmers had lost 1.2 billion and Russian fertilizer manufacturers 1.6 billion, roughly half their profit margins due to high cost for shipping, spare parts, and financial transactions. Well, that's because of sanctions. Okay, Putin and Patrushev blamed the increase solely on these Western sanctions. According to Putin, Russia showed, quote, miracles of endurance and patience, unquote, hoping that its foreign colleagues would finally begin to, quote, fully comply with the agreed and approved parameters and conditions, unquote. Now, what he's actually trying to do is get to a place where they'll lift more sanctions than just fertilizer and agricultural products, but more, including other things related to shipping and otherwise, which they're not going to do. Instead, Russia reaped, quote, arrogance and impudence, promises and empty chatter, unquote, he said. Well, he's always blaming the West for not fulfilling their bargains, not doing their part, not living up to whatever their promises are, and this is just more of the same. Although the West never sanctioned Russian grain or fertilizer, Putin's argument was that the sanctions on Russia's banks and machinery imports effectively sanctioned agricultural industries. So you're going to lift sanctions on Russian banks so that they can do everything else, including agriculture, that doesn't make any sense. They would never do that. Russia sought to leverage Black Sea security to overturn Kyiv's action. So they're going to make themselves a nuisance in the Black Sea, threatening these ships by walking away from the deal and then saying, well, now all these ships are free game. Well, if all of the Western ships are free game, all of your ships were also free game, and that's what happened. Russia's very reason for agreeing to the grain initiative was to slow down Ukrainian exports. So there's this trade war between Russia and Ukraine that for agriculture that already pre-existed before the war, and this may have been as much of a cause of the invasion as other reasons. Under the initiative, Russia was entitled to inspect grain ships, but at average daily inspections had fallen from 11 to 5 by early last year, said the UN, causing Ukrainian exports to fall from 4.3 million tons in October to 1.3 million tons in May. So the Black Sea Grain Initiative deal was not really helping Ukraine as much as they thought anyway, and then Putin walked away from it, and then it went up. It's fascinating. This was merely the latest tactic in a trade war that long predated Russia's ground war. Putin started placing barriers to trade on Ukrainian agricultural products from grain to dairy as early as 2012. Russia would impose certain tariffs and they would abandon them arbitrarily. So Russia was monkeying with Ukrainian. So look, Russia loves to talk about when it comes to the four oblasts that they just snatched and claim now to be Russia, as they should have the right to deal with them, make their own decisions as long as they're choosing Russia. But they were putting these trade barriers up against Ukrainian agriculture, and again, the way that they said that really resonated to me. They would impose certain tariffs and they would abandon them arbitrarily. Well, what do you do? Why do you do that? Well, because you're creating uncertainty. And when you create uncertainty, we don't know how to plan for the future, and it makes it very, very difficult for them to operate. Look, Putin was weaponizing uncertainty to paralyze decision-making in agricultural companies and to deny investment in the capacity. So it's kind of like during COVID, businesses didn't know how to plan, so there was not a lot of growth because, well, I mean, are we still going to be in COVID, or we're not going to be in COVID, or how do you plan for the future? The construction of the Kerch Bridge may have been part of this trade war. I never thought of the Kerch Bridge as part of the trade war, but listen to this. The bridge basically denied high-volume tankers access to the Azov seaports, which became unavailable to Ukraine in 2016 to 2019. Wow, farmers in the east were hurt by this. None of Putin's tactics, however, seemed to work. Ukraine's goods, mainly agricultural, were becoming ever more competitive with Russia's. Exports rose from 33.5 billion in 2016 to 63.1 billion in 2021, according to the World Bank. So, Russia has been trying to stifle Ukrainian grain and other agricultural exports as a trade war well before we got anywhere near this war. Isn't that fascinating? Okay, Putin's war cost the Ukrainian economy 29% of gross domestic product, GDP. So about a third of its economy was just decimated by the war. 14% of its population. Its goods exports plummeted to 40.1 billion. But Ukraine agriculture is now bouncing back with a record harvest of 80 million tons. 58 million tons of it was grain. Russia, in contrast, harvested more than twice as much grain, 123 million tons. Well, good on them. But its landmass is 28 times greater than Ukraine's, and its population is 5 times greater. And I would also say that Ukraine is not occupying a fifth of Russia, where Russia is occupying a fifth of Ukraine. Ukraine is punching way above Russia's weight. Rising agricultural imports may now represent Ukraine's best hope of prosecuting the war. Now think about this. This is really interesting. We're talking about, like, hey, can America get its act together and actually provide these weapons and other supplies for Ukraine? And what if Western partners aren't there? Ukraine still needs to have a functioning economy and sell its exports so that it can provide for itself. Okay, Kyiv faces a gaping budget deficit of $43 billion this year and faces political hurdles in both Brussels and Washington. So Kyiv needs to maximize export revenue, and Russia is trying to starve it. So there's this economic war happening simultaneously. There's a hot war and the economic war and the political war and the informational war, and it's one layered on top of another. Ukraine cannot rely only on international grants and loans. Everybody knows that. Russia understands this too. Its desire to destroy the port infrastructure is aimed at reducing the flow of export earnings to Ukraine in the hope that this will destabilize the domestic economic situation. Again, it's economic warfare. They want to get Ukraine off the market. Now, this is really interesting. So they can get monopoly positions, and they can later weaponize or politicize them. For the Middle East, a lot of concerns are food security. If your major trading partner is just Russia, then they have some leverage. So if you're in the Middle East or in Africa, you should want to trade with both Ukraine and Russia so that you're not destabilized by just being beholden to the one partner. That's just plain business sense. So Russia tries to enforce the embargo. In addition to attacking Ukraine's Black Sea ports, Russia sent drones and missiles to destroy cranes and silos at Ukraine's Danubian ports. That's the Danube River. Russia tried to demonstrate that it did not agree with the opening of the new grain corridor without its participation. So what's a new grain corridor? So let's look at this. So it used to be like that they could go like straight down, and Russia had this deal brokered by Turkey. They could go straight down, but Russia could intercept and monitor the ships that were coming out with grain. So once that deal ended, Ukraine started hitting these ships over here, and they simultaneously figured if we can go from Odessa and we can get to Romania, we can just hug the coast. It's now essentially NATO territory in the waters hugging the coast. And so see all these ships down here going out, or these ships going out through the Danube. Either way, Russia can't touch it once it's like that. And they've been fairly successful with this. Okay. Russia tried to demonstrate that it did not agree. Russia completely or partially destroyed about 180 port infrastructure facilities and 300,000 tons of grain. To top it all off, Russia began to mine the sea channel from Ukraine ports to Romania with adjustable air bombs. Russia also tried coercion. It fired warning shots at a Palau-flagged Surkuru Oken, a merchant vessel, on August 14th as it tried to approach the Romanian port of Sulina, a major offloading point for freight floating down the Danube. When that didn't work, it boarded it using a Ka-29 helicopter. With its financial lifeline at stake, Ukraine pushed back against Russia's embargo, and you remember there were spectacular results. So, I had said earlier that it was they were having not a lot of success along the line of contact throughout Ukraine. And so the Black Sea was a way of having an asymmetric effect against a bigger enemy in, having these attacks against these Russian vessels. But I think it's just as much because of this as it was because of that. I think both of these factor in well, but it was both of these. Okay. With financial lifeline at stake, Ukraine pushed back against Russia's embargo with outstanding success. On August 4th, its naval drones attacked the Olenskorsky Gornyak, a Rapusha-class landing ship just outside Novorossiysk harbor. Russia had relocated much of its Sevastopol Black Sea-based fleet after Ukraine sank its Black Sea flagship in May. The following night, Ukraine put a hole in the engine room of a Russian fuel tanker just south of the Kerch Bridge. So, and we remember these events. These were important events, and it was pretty spectacular, right? Since both of these attacks happened just off Russia's Black Sea coast, they proved Ukraine's claim that it could bottle up the Black Sea fleet, deny Russia access to territorial waters, and provide a safe corridor for freight shipping. Now, that's going to have a positive effect on getting the shipping out and lowering shipping costs. By the end of 2023, Ukraine had exported 15 million tons of goods through the corridor. Now, understand in your mind how much this is. Two-thirds of them agricultural in the 6 months of the deal with Russia's compared to 33 million tons for the entire year that the deal was in place. So basically, it's pound for pound almost the same. And half of that 6 months was trying to figure out how they're going to do it. So in other words, Russia's departure from the Black Sea Grain Initiative had virtually no impact, except that they lost a bunch of ships in the process. In October, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced a new export route via rail through Moldova and Romania. And Romania also suggested offloading its grain at Danubian ports in Brelia and Galat. Galat is right across from Moldova. That's actually where I almost lost a shoe because I wanted to touch my toe into the Danube to say that I had, and I kind of like sank into the mud and almost lost my entire shoe. Not my brightest moment. Russia did not admit defeat. It attacked ships with missiles to drive up freight rates. Okay, so they're trying to, keep making things worse. One such attack on a Liberian flagged tanker last November killed a sailor and raised rates by $20 a ton overnight. Now, the UK came to its aid. The United Kingdom came to the rescue, negotiating with 14 shipping insurance companies a special mechanism to discount war risk insurance. Good on the UK. Its truck convoys to European ports have encountered local opposition from farmers and truckers. By the way, the farmers and truckers on the Polish border that were most out there politically were those that were most united with a kind of pro-Russian party, which is kind of an interesting nuance. Ukraine's success in exporting grains has allowed world prices to drop, making it a victim of its own success. Ukraine's wheat farmers were operating at a loss of $36 a ton. So, understand this. They were so successful that they put out so much that they actually caused the price to drop. So, they were doing pretty well. Still, Ukraine's increasing share of the global market means that it's winning against Russia's trade war despite the embargo. Ukraine's agricultural ministry said its overall exports last year were 7% higher in value compared to 2022, reaching $23 billion. So that's amazing. Ukraine has become a competitive player. Okay, all that, this should add some nodes to your neural network to understand what's going on. Ukraine was a threat to Russia economically here with this grain trade because that Russia, now, if you're Russia and you're a mob boss and you have to get your opponent off the market, invading them and causing all this grief in Ukraine is one way to really shore up your interest in the Middle East and Africa because now you're the real big grain trading partner. It's kind of a sick way of looking at the world, but I think that factored into Putin's calculation. I'm not sure that that's all of it. I wouldn't say that that's all of it. There were other factors as well. But this is probably higher than actual NATO membership in the sense that they couldn't actually join NATO when their land was occupied. And even though if they're saying they wanted to, even just because they had the civil war between the section in Donbass and the rest of Ukraine. They couldn't join NATO at the time anyway. So this actually would factor higher. At any rate, tell me what you thought about this. I thought this was absolutely fascinating as an article. And when I look at how Ukraine has fought back and then created this grain corridor, I'm just simply amazed at their ingenuity. Tell me what you think about that. Put it in the comments below. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.